Hello everyone, I welcome you all to today's lecture. In this video, what I have brought with myself today is that very question that you often ask to most of your teachers, thinking, why exactly is reading comprehension the very first exercise that is tested in most of your exams? Now, whenever you look at the skill of solving reading comprehension exercise, you may have thousands of doubts regarding how to always ensure getting that 100% score in most of your exams. When you look at the essential requirements of reading comprehension questions, the first thing you need to remember is that it's a multifaceted exercise. It cannot just depend on length of the passage, types of questions, but it's like a complete union of all the skills that the examiner is trying to test whenever he frames that question. So in this video, let's try and understand simply what are the demands of a reading comprehension question, especially when you solve them in the context of a subjective school exam paper, or for that matter, even in most of your MCQ exams. If you understand the nature of the question correctly, then the expected answer will always be 100% accurate. So let's try and begin our journey of understanding reading comprehension a lot better with few simple pointers to keep in mind. Now, the first thing to remember is that what do I mean when I say reading comprehension is a multifaceted exercise? If you are trying to look for the ultimate clue that tells you what exactly comprehension should be, then ideally you should begin with the very first word, comprehend. Now, when you understand the word comprehend, it automatically tells you that to understand something is the first requirement of the question. Now, if it's a passage that is 500 word long, the examiner might not be asking you to focus on everything together. But if you look at the skills that are tested, the four fundamental skills that the examiner is paying attention to are fluency, word recognition, thought flow, and analysis of information. If I know the expectation of the examiner, I know how to attempt my reading strategy in a lot better fashion, because whenever somebody is looking at the nature of the question, let's say for instance, most of the questions are based on just analyzing information and writing appropriate factual response. So the question will be a lot simpler in this case. However, if the examiner wants you to understand the whole thought flow, you will have to read complete central idea and then prepare your response. Similarly, questions based on vocabulary come in the category of word recognition, and simultaneously the fluency of thought is required to be tested, especially when we are looking at arrangements of facts. So if somebody says that how to proceed with reading comprehension, the first thing to keep in mind is that you should know the types of passages that you will mostly come across in your subjective papers. Now, when it comes to types of passages, there are two kinds that you should be well versed with. The first is a factual passage, the other is a discursive passage. Factual passages are mostly explanatory in nature. Discursive, on the other hand, will be argument based. You may find them on a regular basis in most of your editorial articles that you find in newspapers. But if somebody looks at the fundamental features of these passages, let's begin with the factual passage first. In your exam, you will mostly find it in a weightage of 8 marks. How exactly are the parameters judged? Firstly, it's a 300 to 350 word long passage, fairly shorter as compared to discursive. Second, carries 8 very short answer type questions, and these questions will be straightforward in terms of nature of information that is required. Similarly, the marks that are allotted to each question is 1 mark for each short answer question, but it's a very short answer question that you are supposed to attempt. Similarly, discursive passage on the other hand will have a weightage of 12 marks. Completely in nature, it will be different from the expectations of a factual passage. If it is 350 to 400 word long, you might feel that you have to read deeper in order to understand the argument of the passage. But the nature of question carries 4 short answer questions, carrying 2 marks each. Secondly, carries 2 sentence completion questions. Now, sentence completion could be either one word fill in the blank or phrases that are missing from the question, and you are supposed to provide them based on the passage. Each question carries 1 mark, and lastly carries 2 vocabulary based questions, either synonym or antonym, for 1 mark each. Now if I remember the demand of the question, I can proceed with the second question in my head, that what are these passages really testing? So if you have to answer what do these questions really look at, what do they test, what do they assess, the first thing to remember is that how you evaluate and analyze the given passages is the examiner's expectation. Your analysis cannot be based on personal interpretation. The analysis has to be based on author's voice. Every time, remember, the passage has to be understood keeping in mind the context. Every word that is written by the author has to be understood based on his interpretation, not yours, not mine either. Secondly, how you locate and recall information. This is going back and forth to the passage to filter out essential information. Thirdly, how you draw on the knowledge of the text. These are implied ideas. Some information may be factually written. Examiner might ask you to conclude responses based on that. That's why he expects you to draw on information. Fourth, how you write short reflective responses, especially when it comes to 1 marker or 2 marker answers. If your subjective response is not to the point, then you might have an ambiguous explanation and thereby losing marks. And at the same time, how you complete descriptions and make logical connections. Now these questions are mostly tabular in nature, where some content is given, the other part has to be provided from the passage. That is the expectation of the examiner. So if this is clear in your head, one thing that often is asked by most of the students is how to make reading comprehension exercise stronger. Now there are 4 simple parameters with which you should essentially work. Firstly, create a thought flow by looking only for the main idea of each paragraph. Let's say your whole passage is a single para, then divide it into different ideas, but just only look for the thought flow. Don't try to understand everything. Therefore, don't worry about specific details and words that you may not understand on the first reading. If there are words that you lose hang of or are not sure of their meaning, keep marking them, but they are not essential to understand the thought flow. Secondly, underline the key points or write them in brief. These are your thought flow pointers. And circle words that are difficult to comprehend on first reading to later analyze them if vocabulary questions are based on these. So let's say there are no difficult words that can be given in a question based on a reading comprehension exercise. But still, if you have a vocabulary question and there are possible set of words that you identify that are still not sure, you keep marking them so that you can later on come back to those words when there is a question asked. Otherwise, everything in the passage is not meant to be understood. Similarly, look through the ideas based on questions that are asked. It's always advisable to glance through the questions first to make your reading faster and effective by reading relevant portions more carefully. Now, this is where most of you differ. There are students who would think reading questions first is better. There are people who think reading passage first is better. Remember, the strategy of reading comprehension changes as per the nature of the passage. So the first thing to keep in mind is that when I browse through the questions and understand what nature they belong to, I can come back to the passage and see which portion is relevant enough to be understood. Thereby, a glancing through the thought flow is also sufficient to understand the main idea. And lastly, read between the lines to understand implied ideas which are often asked in vocabulary and inference-based questions. So if you do not have these two kinds of questions, reading between the lines should not be on your agenda. If you are paying attention to vocabulary and implied idea questions, then pay attention to the meaning of the author, which might be hidden somewhere based on individual ideas. Now, once you understand how to make reading comprehension exercise stronger, one more doubt that is often asked by most of you would be related to vocabulary based questions. So when somebody says guessing the meaning of unknown words is one of the biggest challenges that we face, remember there are few simple strategies that you can take help from. Firstly, referring to dictionary is not always essential. So for those of you who worry that ma'am we can't mug up entire dictionary to be comfortable with each word meaning, reading comprehension is all about contextual vocabulary, not dictionary vocabulary. So the first thing you remember is infer the meaning of a particular word by reading the sentences before and after the word. That gives you the context of the situation. Similarly, these give you the context of the word at the same time. And from the context, try to draw out the meaning. So remember when I said drawing on information means concluding based on fact. So once you've judged the context, conclude the most possible appropriate meaning of the word, and this helps in maintaining the continuity while reading without losing interest and concentration. So for those of you who always go back and forth because few difficult words are possibly hindering your reading, if you do not stop on dictionary based vocabulary, you can easily browse through the ideas and at the same time only pay attention to the meaning of a particular word by reading the sentences before and after. This is what you should remember in order to understand that it's a contextual vocabulary. So the context is more important as compared to your personal understanding of the meaning. Now, this will look slightly theoretical unless somebody has an example to remember it by, and therefore look at the paragraph. Tourism may also have ill effects on local cultures. The youth are most susceptible to get swayed by watching the tourists, and cultural alienation occurs. Hence, the social impacts are not easy to digest in a cultural society like India. When you see the highlighted word susceptible and let's say you are not comfortable with its meaning, your conclusion should be based on what you just read above and below the word. When you read the first line, you saw ill effects of tourism, to which youth are most susceptible. So there are chances that they'll be highly influenced, right? So based on my reading of the word, I can conclude that easily influenced could be one parameter. Vulnerable also means the same. Prone to something, gullible, that is the nature of youth that is highlighted. So all these words become possible synonyms based on the context of the sentence, not knowing the dictionary meaning. Similarly, there are places where I might not know the context that well, so I can take help from something called roots, prefixes and suffixes. So the second thing to remember is knowledge of suffixes, prefixes, word families and word combinations also help in guessing the meaning of unknown words. For example, when you look at reconcile, you notice re meaning again, con as a root carries the meaning together. When you read both of them together, you might not be aware of reconcile as a whole word, but you can break it down into parts, concluding that the word reconcile is close as to restoring a friendly relationship or reunite or pacify as per the context. So I might use either of the two strategies, either understanding of roots, prefixes, suffixes or a contextual reading. But there is one more catch here. What if I know the word already, but the situation is using it differently? For example, while trekking, these shoes offer great purchase on the mountains. You read the sentence, you know that as far as your meaning of purchase is concerned, it does not fit the sentence. As per your common understanding is what I mean. So as per common understanding, purchase means either to buy as a verb or the item bought as a noun. But here it's meaning neither of them. And therefore, the context tells me that while trekking, what are shoes supposed to offer? They offer a good hold or grip on the surface of mountains, and therefore I can conclude that the alternate contextual meaning should be either grip or hold, and both of them are actually acting as the uncommon meaning of the same common word that you are aware of. So I hope with these simple pointers in your head, introducing reading comprehension now becomes a lot simpler. In the next segment, let's try and understand how to really understand passages with the help of thought flow that we did discuss at the beginning. What exactly is thought flow is what we'll look at in the next segment. So let's jump to the next part and understand passages a lot more clearly.